I'm really excited just to have this next session here, which is just starting now to think us forward, or help us to think forward into leadership into the future. How do we lead for transformation? And we're extremely privileged today to have a couple of international guests, and then we'll have our local guests as well, with Martin Westwell, who is the Chief Executive of the Department of Education in South Australia. And you heard Bill Lucas kind of singing their praises before in terms of the progress that they're making in some of these essential areas. And then Dr. George Philhower, who I mentioned yesterday as someone who's got the theme of joy underpinning his whole school district in a manifest ways, but also moving now into supporting this first established network of micro schools. You'll be interested to hear that. And then we'll be joined soon after that by Dale and Maurie, who'll come and kind of give us some New Zealand perspective on the ideas around leading for transformation. And I think following the student panel, this is quite appropriate. We've had quite a challenge if you analyse or synthesise the feedback we had from them. So let's listen now to some people who actually really are leading transformational change in their respective jurisdictions. And I'm going to start, Martin, if I can invite you to start us off with that, and introduce yourself and present to us. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Derek. Thanks for the opportunity, and good morning, everyone. Look, I'm the Chief Executive of the Department for Education in South Australia, so I run public education over here. I've got some slides I wanted to share with you as well, so just let me pop those up. Okay. And what I wanted to talk to you about, what I wanted to share with you was, in light of some provocations we've been given about the kind of things that we might talk about, particularly kind of in education, site leaders' role, other leaders' roles in kind of leading from the middle, so you've got people working with you, for you, people in systems and other structures, who've got other roles. And so that was kind of leading from the middle. And what I wanted to do was to start to share with you our kind of story as a system and draw parallels out for stories for our sites as well. So the first thing that we did was we started out and we were really clear that we were going to have a strategy. We were going to go for a thing. We were going to have a strategy, but a strategy isn't planning. Sometimes in education we talk about strategies, and then they're not strategies, they're tactics, the things that we do, they're initiatives, they're plans, the actions that we take. And almost sometimes those are the kind of the programs that we take on and we adopt. And for me, that's not strategy. Strategies are kind of a set of choices, and you've got to make those choices first as a site leader or as a system leader, and then everything else is guided by that. We have this notion that we can do anything, but we can't do everything. So we just got to make some choices. And some of the things that we won't do are actually really good things. The positive things, the things that other people would say, this is a really good thing, but we're not doing them because we're making some choices. And I think that's important, as I say, as a system and as a site. And so the first thing I think that's super important, we talk about this rhetorically all the time, but is to really listen. Is to really listen to people. And I'll show you some quick examples of that. But the reason for me why we should listen, lots of different ways, lots of different reasons, but big ones are because you start to understand if you've got a shared aspiration with people, with your staff, with your students, with your families, with your system. And if you've got that shared aspiration, it's a lot easier to move forward. But it also helps you to understand what you've got to work with. You hear the conceptions, maybe alternative conceptions that people have got. You hear the things that people put up as blockers as to why things can't happen. So that's okay. It's not about convincing them at this moment. It's about, thinking about, so what's my theory of change going to be? If people are thinking like that, I might have to come at it in this way. And so you're kind of designing your improvement, your change, your moving forward with those things in mind. And so as a system, what we did a couple of years ago, we started out and we started with our kids, and we started with the kids on purpose to send a message through for our organisation, our system. We taught with over 12,000 South Australians, but as I say, started with thousands of our students, some big forums, and as we went out to remote and regional, some smaller forums. I'm going to show you this slide, and this slide necessarily for kind of reading all the detail on it. But what we did was we listened, we started, as I said, with our children and young people, and then we reflected back what we'd heard. And this turned out to be really important for us in our leadership and our change. So, these are things that we heard students saying, you won't be surprised. They wanted to have more of their ideas in the work. They wanted to be able to kind of be participants in learning, not receiving teaching. They wanted more creativity. And that kind of turned into some school actions. So this is a particular primary school, and what you can see here, every kid in the school, in the primary school, was going up to the next year, and they would have a different teacher in the next year. And what they did here was they wrote a letter to their teacher for next year. The younger students, the photo on the right, the younger students, it was a bit more scaffolded, a bit more free text on the left-hand side there with the older students. And then the highlighting that you can see, the coding, the themes through what the students wanted to. So again, the school trying to listen to the students about what they're looking for, and of course, what they're really doing is thinking about how they can activate their students as partners in the learning. We talked to our parents and carers, and what we heard. Again, you won't be surprised. Foundational skills, literacy, numeracy, really important. But they were also looking for problem solving, it being okay to make mistakes. Our industry bodies, we asked them about what was important. And again, really interesting, just as important as what they would call foundational skills as well. Other capabilities, characteristics, dispositions of our students. The reason I share this with you isn't because of the detail, it's because by listening to people and then publishing that back to them, what we did was we've now got this body of kind of evidence from our community and different parts of the community, and we can use that in different ways when we think about, well, who influences who influences teachers. It's not me. It's other teachers who are the biggest influence on teachers. It's students who are on the bigger influence on teachers. So now I'm using these teacher voices and student voices that we've collected to influence teachers. If I think about me and my leading from the middle, I've got politicians above me, so I'm in estimates and I'm getting asked about the work that we're doing, and it's the work that we're doing is not typical in Australia. I feel like we're swimming against the tide sometimes, and there I am in estimates, and what I'm able to do is to say, well, we've documented the voice of industry, and industry is saying this is what they want. So your back to basics approach isn't going to be sufficient, and industry and parents and students are telling us so, because I know that those industry voices are much stronger influences on politicians, particularly opposition politicians, than perhaps teachers' voices or my voices. So I'm trying to use these voices as a kind of leader in the middle to influence down and to influence up as well, and thinking about whose voice influences whom. And so here in South Australia as a system, what we did was we said, well, this is a strategy, this is all about choices. The first choice we made was that we were going to be purpose-driven. And I think this is really important. So many people talk about being data-driven. My job, and I'm going to suggest to you that your job, isn't to improve data, it's to improve learning. And that should flow through in the data. But I am not getting everybody in my system to focus on improving, in Australian NAPLAN data. I want to trust that will come because we are going to be purpose-driven. We are going to have a shared purpose. And our kind of thumbnail for this, our quick way of describing this, is that we want our students to, achieve, but they've got to be learners as well. So learn and achieve and thrive and prosper. But this important choice about our purpose, this is our purpose, this is what we're all going after, has been the change story. The second big choice was, okay, what are we going to focus on? And there's thousands, hundreds of things you could focus on, especially as a system. And these are the 4 areas that we said, well, if that's what we're going for, students learning, achieving, thriving and prospering, what we know is that what we want to focus on is equity and excellence, well-being, because we know that well-being supports equity and it supports excellence, learner agency, again, because those three are connected, and being an effective learner. We are going to develop our kids as effective learners. That is what we are going for. And we know that these four things all interact and work together. So we could have done other things. We could have done more things. But this is enough, I think. There's more than enough here as a system. And in fact, what I asked my schools to do was, again, to take this notion of we can do anything, but we can't do everything. So make some choices, even within this. What are you going to focus on as a school? And so we have this important notion in the system of being tight and flexible. So tight on what we're going for, tight on our purpose. This is what we're going for. We're all in this. Tight on these four areas of impact, but recognizing that people are different. And for me, context is different for different schools. And so we have to have a level of flexibility. I think this notion of what we're tight on and what we're flexible on is really important in leadership, because otherwise you end up being tight on your principles, what you're going for, and tight on the actions. And now you're just managing. You're not leading anymore. Activating people, getting that flexibility is what's important. Again, in terms of our leadership, one of the things that we talk about as a system and for sites is to know your capabilities. We know that any impact that we have in education actually comes from this kind of last 3 feet. You've got all kinds of things going on in your school and in your system, but it's the last 3 feet that really matter. But what goes on around that, and we're not going to talk about the detail of this, but what goes on around that basically is you've got people who can change things. So we're focusing here on our teachers, our leaders, our kids as being part of this, and our communities as being part of this. And then we've got our system levers, our money, our infrastructure, the way that we use our resources. But the people levers, I think, obviously from our leadership, are the things that are most important. And it comes again back to this question about not what you're going to get people to do, but how are you going to want to activate them? Why do you want these particular people activated? When are you going to activate them? How do you want them to be activated? What do you want them to be doing? How are we going to activate our students, for example, in our system, and for what purpose? So again, as for leaders, I think this is a crucial question about activating our people. So in our story, we've made a clear choice about our purpose. We made a choice about our areas of impact, where we're going to play and where we're going to not focus on. We then think about our curriculum, so that's that third circle there. You know, what are the capabilities, the knowledge, the dispositions that we want our students to have? Australian curriculum certainly doesn't have any dispositions in it, but we've been really clear that if we are going to meet our purpose, we have to think about the dispositions of our students. We have a set of guiding principles, and I think these are really important because these are our cultural markers. Again, in our leadership, when we think about our leadership actions and what we do as leaders, I think this notion of these guiding principles, these cultural settings, consistently applied, I think that helps us to bring trust. It helps us to nurture people. And so I know this has been quite a gallop through kind of what we've been thinking about in South Australia, but for me, our leadership has to be a leadership that fosters that moral purpose, that professional identity. It activates people, teachers, leaders, parents, students within our settings. And we've got to stop, again, in Australia, we have such a focus on accountability and control. And we're really starting to think much more about how do we get coherence, tight and flexible, everybody working in the same direction. And I talk about responsibility, not accountability. Because when we do this, I want people to take responsibility. People have got choice. Have got professional choices. And I want to take the responsibility for our students learning and achieving, and with confidence that then the results will flow. If I make them accountable for students' results, we're playing a game now instead of actually educating our students. And Derek, I think that's enough for me for now.
Oh, Martin, that's more than enough, I think. Good habit around all girls. I've seen at least 8 people sending you an email inviting you here to be our next Secretary of Education. But what you've shared is so insightful, and I've had the privilege of listening to Martin talk about this on a number of occasions. I'm just going to things tight and flexible. What a great thing. A responsibility instead of accountability, registering. The whole idea of differentiating between the people levers and the system levers. These are things that we're going to pick up on this afternoon as we start the process. But Martin, that was just superb. And we no doubt maybe one or two questions in the room before we move on. Well, I'm limiting time for this, you can tell, but if there is something burning that anyone wants to ask while we've got Martin here. That's the first time we've had no questions. That's how stunned they are, Martin. I'm sure they will come back. But look, I'll say again on behalf of everyone, just invite another round of applause, please, for Martin. And Martin, we've got an online community that I've set up, and we've got lots of things I've dropped in there. I've dropped in one or two that I know of that you've got. But if you've got anything else you think it's worth reading, some of the stuff that you shared on your slides, ping it over to me, and I'll make sure that that's there for people to become familiar with. Kia ora. That's great. Well, we moved on now. The other person we've got online, Dr. George Philhower, and I'll just invite him now to come and fill your hearts with joy. George, over to you.
Thanks, Derek. I'm going to try to share my screen as well. There we go. Awesome. I think you can see that okay.
We're just looking at
Martin, can you give me
the show?
What's that?
It's not showing as a show, it's just showing as the slides. Oh, there, play, yeah. Are you still with us, George, or have you frozen? Oh, my word. This was my greatest fear for the entire 2 days. And it's the first time it's happened. Haven't I go, George? So just for context, while George is fiddling. So George is in a school district that's on the outskirts of Indianapolis in Indiana, rural farming district. And he's got elementary and middle and secondary in his district. He's just gone off, he'll come back in. And some of you might have seen people or heard people like, whose name just gone from me? Honeywell, what's his first name? Kevin, yeah, Kevin Honeywell, good mate. Honeycutt at least, sorry, thank you. But Kevin, when I was last over there, Kevin I know well, but I don't know his name, but Kevin was in there inspiring the stuff. And it was an amazing experience just to see kids, parents, teachers together at these big joy jams. And of course, any of you who know Kevin will know how well he can do that. But even more interesting to me, and this might sound trite, but actually it's made a huge difference. I was walking through the school and everyone was in school, and the DP came out. Just after first period to start, the DP came out and he had a big red and white striped shirt on and a red and white striped sort of nightcap. And in his hand, he had, and under his arm was a big ghetto blaster with a particular piece of music that I didn't particularly recognize. And he went through the entire complex, just bursting into classrooms, and all the kids would stand up and start dancing to this piece of music, and then he would just leave again, right? But apparently it was a part of, it worked for them. This was a thing that introduced to reinforce joy. And apparently these kids had access to this bit of music at home, and these were the senior kids right down to the junior ones, and parents who could still tolerate it were dancing away with it at home and so forth. But it was just indicative of that notion of how intentional they were about establishing a culture of joy through the whole school, right? So I'm hoping like crazy George will get back on in it, because I don't want to tell his whole story. And the move towards these micro schools has only just been announced in the last fortnight, so I'm as interested as you are to hear about them. While we are waiting for him then, because we've got Martin still on the line, has anyone thought of a question you'd like to ask him? Okay, we got a question. I'll relate it back to you, Martin. So there's an interest around. George, we're just going to ask Martin one more question. Great to have you back on. But Martin,
Perfect.
that's cool. Martin, just a question which has been a hot topic here, of course, in New Zealand, but it has to do with indigeneity and the journey that's happening in Australia. So it was around how specifically in that strategic process that you've been working, have you been including the voice of your indigenous communities?
Yeah, great question, and you know the different history that we've got here in Australia. Certainly, when we were talking to students and families, we went out and just to our remote communities and just sat down with those people, talked to them about their aspirations for their kids, and in fact, we ended up with a point where we signed an agreement with the Anangu people. So the Anangu are the people of Central Australia, and a big part of South Australia. And that was about kind of giving power away, essentially, and saying what power we can give away, what influence we want to give away. And, when the white fella's way of doing that is to write it down in agreement, you make a promise, and a promise is an agreement. So that's where we are now, particularly with the Anangu, to say, this is the influence that you can have, and we're writing this down because this is our promise. What we're really kind of focusing on is, aspects of all four of those areas of impact and what it means for Aboriginal children and communities. And so that notion of equity is a really important one. Equity, sometimes we think about it as, those groups who are not doing quite so well on our standardized tests, and how do we get them to do better? That's still part of equity. But the real kind of challenge that we've got, that we're giving to ourselves, is what does success look like? Because this kind of almost one size fits all, that definition of success doesn't fit all. And certainly for some of our Aboriginal kids, communities, it really doesn't fit. So broadening that definition of success has been really important. And we continue to work on that, but we do have Aboriginal languages in our year 12 offerings now, and we recognise cultural learning, and there's nowhere else in Australia that does that, and that directly came from our community saying, we want this in the certificate.
Thank you, Martin. Great to hear. So, George, I see you online now. Can we have another crack at you? Is this just happening when you're showing slides?
I think it is, and I'm not sure what's going on. So we'll just give it a go without them. And if something, is that okay?
It's more than okay. Thanks, George.
Yeah, perfect. So leading for transformational change is something we think about a lot. So I'm George Philhower. I'm the superintendent at Eastern Hancock. And we like to think about a study that was done at Stanford University in 1990. And what they did was they took two groups, and they split their groups into half of the group was tappers, and half the group was guessers. So the group that was the tappers would tap a tune, and they would just tap out the rhythm to any well-known song. And they tried to get those people to predict what percent of the people do you think are going to be able to guess the tune that you're tapping. And then the guessers tapped that tune. And when they asked the tappers to predict, they guessed 50%, that we would tap the tune. 50% would guess that the correct song. And what actually happened was it was 2.5%. And what the reason for that is because the tune is something that only the tappers could hear in their head. That the tappers could hear the music, they could hear the whole tune, but the guessers could only hear what was tapping. And we like to think about that because, like, I don't know about you, if you're all leaders and you've been standing in front of a group of people trying to explain to them something that you learned at a conference like you're at right now, it's a lot like that experience, that you're trying to explain to them what's going on, and all that they are hearing is the taps that you're tapping, and so what that they called that the curse of knowledge. And I would poise that the curse of knowledge is one of the biggest barriers to transformational change. And in this metaphor, we're all the tappers. We hear the music, we know the rhythm, but we forget that the others in the room can only hear the noise of the tap that we're tapping. So as I think about leading transformational change, if I could show you my slides, you'd see this triangle. And at the base of the triangle are what we call beliefs. And the triangle is divided into 4 sections, and it's beliefs, and then practices, and then structures, and then tools. And at the top half of that triangle lives structures and tools. And often at school, we shift those structures and those tools, and we expect change to happen. We change the bell schedule if you're at the high school, or we change the lunch schedule because we need more time for lunch, and we expect different things to happen. And the truth is that those changes at the top of that pyramid, changing structures, changing tools, those are transactional changes. Sometimes we need to make transactional changes because we need longer for lunch, or we need longer to transition between classes. But if we truly want transformational change, we got to start at the base of that triangle, and that's beliefs. So as a leader, I like to think that, you know, my title is superintendent. I know that's a title that doesn't exist where you live, but like any leader, because of your positional power, people will often do what you ask them to do because you told them to do it, because you have some positional power. However, what I've learned is that if I don't want people to just do things because I ask them to do. I want them to change how they're thinking about the way they do their jobs for the rest of their career. And if I want that, my primary job is to shift and align the beliefs. And if I want to have any hope that they're going to do that for the rest of their life, also knowing that I'm the type of leader that shows up at a conference like this that talks about transformational change, which can be intimidating if I'm a leader, if I'm somebody working for me. So I feel like my staff are always trying to guess the tune that's in my head. And what I decided was, if that's going to be the case, I need to give them some hints at what are the tunes that are in my head. And if I could show you a video, there's a video, you could write it down. It's called The Axis of Awesome. And they talk about having a 4-chord song. And what they say is that this band does not have a hit song because they have yet to come up with a 4-chord song. And they will go on to play every imaginable song you could imagine to those 4 chords. They'll just keep playing songs and songs and songs. So what I realized was I needed a 4-chord song. So in my district at Eastern Hancock, our 4-chord song, it goes these 4 chords. So chord number 1 is joy. And we call these our promises. So joy is just the idea that we've got to be intentional every single day about what are we doing to make these people want to be at this place. And we believe that the gravity of the school, the gravity of just watching the news is not pulling us towards a place of joy. So if we're going to get there, it's got to be something that we intentionally do. So for us, it has a lot to do with creating magical moments and creating peak moments for kids. The Dan and Chip Heath wrote a book called The Power of Moments. And they talk about the Disney paradox. And if you've ever get a chance to come to Disney, it's 120 degrees and lines are 5 hours long and food's really expensive. But when you leave Disney, you have positive experiences. And the reason is because they're the best in the business at creating these peak moments. And then another example is a group called the Savannah Bananas. In America, baseball is about the most boring sport you could ever imagine. And most kids can't get through inning number 9. But the Savannah Bananas have tried to reimagine what baseball looks like and tried to make it a more entertaining experience. And I think that a part of our job is to figure out how to do that for kids at school. So what that looks like at our school is that we try to embed magical moments for kids as often as we can. A couple of examples of what that looks like. Every year for first graders, which are 6-year-olds, I get to officiate a wedding. I get to marry the letters Q and U every year to try to give those kids a magical moment to anchor that learning experience too. We have a day every year that we call everybody's birthday day. And I had somebody come to me in my district and just say that, I feel like some of these kids don't get their birthdays celebrated the way that I'd like them to. So we're going to celebrate all of their birthdays on one day. So we got 1,200 kids in our district. We invite them all in on one day. It's a surprise every year, and we pretend like it's every one of their birthday. When they walk in, we tell them happy birthday. Every kid gets a birthday cake. Every kid gets a birthday present. And we just treat them as if you would your own kids on your birthday. That day usually ends with some kind of balloon animal making or a magic show or something like that. We've got a position in our district called our Joy Integration Specialist, and all that is really is my secretary. I'm not very good at using a secretary, so we realize that it's not hard to convince teachers to add joy to their lessons, but we were asking people who already have pretty full plates to do one more thing. And so her job is to help teachers create magical moments in their classrooms. You can email her. Her name's Stacy. It's joy@easternhancock.org. You can send her an email if you want to. We also believe that it's such an important thing that we host a summer conference. It's actually next week, July 15th and 16th. It's called Joy Jam, where we just focus on bringing joy in education. So it's a wonderful conference that we try to think of all the things that might bring you joy. It's free to educators, and we integrate that with some incredible speakers. So then what we really believe is that promise number one of joy, and we do believe it's number one, it has to be number one because it's an invitation. And what we believe is that there's these layers of joy. And if we can convince kids to trust us enough to take a step closer, that they will discover those other three promises. And those other three promises are, number one is connection. We want our kids and our grownups to feel known by name, strength, interests, future hopes and dreams and needs. And we feel like if we can create a place where kids are known that much, that it's a pretty special place. So that starts with our staff. If you get hired at Eastern Hancock, we invite you in to meet with me. I talk about our 4 promises, but while you're meeting with me, we sneak your family into our boardroom and we have a celebration, a hiring party for you, just to celebrate you coming to Eastern Hancock. We have therapy dogs. I bring my dog Rosie to school with me every day. And what we try to do is create an environment that feels more like home than it does school, because we know that some of our kids, showing up to school is not something that's easy and something that they look forward to. And if we can create a space that they feel more safe, then that's something we want to do. So promise number 3 for us is the one that we usually start with at school, and it's growth. And growth is just the idea that we want our kids learning new things every day that they will remember. And that sounds really, really easy unless you've ever taught anything ever in your life. Then you know that that's not the case. And we know that kids are spending 60% of their school day learning about things that they already know, which means that kids are showing up every day to show us what they already know instead of showing up ready to learn new stuff. And then also, I think we could all probably remember taking a test on a Friday at 2:00 and by 3:30 forgetting everything that was on that. So we're looking at competency-based learning and all of those things. And for us, that also started with our teachers. We realized that our teacher evaluation system was pretty terrible. When we talked to our teachers about, does this make you better? They all said no. And when we talked to our principals, who are the ones in charge of evaluating those people, and asked them how much of an enjoyable experience that was for them, they said it's pretty terrible. So we started a new process where it's all based on growth for our teachers. And so in our last but not least, 4th promise for us is what we call success. And that's just a reminder that our end goal is not academic proficiency, is that we want kids who are excited about and ready for that Monday after graduation. So those 4 promises at Eastern Hancock, they serve as our compass, because it gives us what direction we want to go to, but it also serves as our filter as we're trying to decide what decisions we're going to say yes to and what decisions we're going to say no to. And as Derek mentioned, something that I've been thinking about a lot, and Derek and I talk pretty frequently and just reflect on what our vision of school might be and what our hopeful impact is. I realize that I don't have enough heartbeats left to make the impact that I want to make if I'm just working inside the existing school system. So I've got a wonderful school board who has allowed me to branch outside. So we've started something that we're calling the Indiana Micro School Collaborative, which is just the idea. If you haven't looked into the micro school movement that's happening, it's really interesting. It's just the idea that schools can start in places where schools aren't traditionally happening. So sometimes it's a church, Our first instance is going to be at a campground that's pretty busy in the summertime as a campground for kids, but pretty empty during the school year. And we're going to have 50 kids there. And it's giving us an opportunity, instead of thinking about transformation, we can build something from scratch. And for us, it's going to be within near eyesight so that we can see something that we're building from scratch, where we're going to have multi-age classrooms learning together at self-paced learning progressions. And we're really excited. We've been given some unique permission. It's never been done, at least in Indiana. We've been given permission to launch learning sites all over our state, where we hope to replicate these kind of things that we believe are good for kids. So I apologize that my slides didn't work. Technical errors that got lost somewhere between, today's yesterday for you. So it got you lost between yesterday and today, probably. And I apologize for that, but I really appreciate being here, and I've been able to eavesdrop on several of the other sessions today, and it's been a spectacular event.
It's a great summary, George, and thank you for that. I'm sure that there'll be a number of people be very keen to sort of observe what happens in your district. And it was a great time with the micro schools at the end, because yesterday we were talking about the role of alternate forms of education that are outside of the traditional school boundaries, particularly in terms of virtual education, all that sort of thing. Time for a question from the floor if there's something really buzzing in your head about what you've just heard from George. So just to pick up a question, is the micro school thing just in your district, or is it statewide, and are other states doing it?
So it's statewide, and as far as I know, there's not other states that are doing it. So for us, it involved me starting another, it's called a 501c3 board. So I officially report to 2 school boards. I'm working with a group called Getting Smart, which is a pretty cool group in the States. Tom Vander Ark has become a friend over the last several years, and Tom's on my board. So he's helping us lead this shift. But there are private versions of micro school networks around the States where families have to pay for their kids to go, but this is the first publicly funded micro school network that is statewide, and it's outside our district boundaries. We can go anywhere we want.
Now I'd like to invite a couple of our own New Zealand speakers to come up. First, Dale Bailey, who will be known to many of you from his work at heading up Springboard Trust. And, as one of New Zealand's sort of premier organisations really dealing with strategic guidance and support for schools, thought it'd be appropriate for Dale to come up and give some insights that he has about transforming education. Dale.
Kia ora tātou, ngā mihi nui. Really great to be here today. I wonder if any of you are aware of the 0800 number, 0800 030 040. This is quite an important one. It's the hotline to report red cone use for overuse. And I think it's a classic example of the era that we're in of performative politics, where something is done quickly and is held to quite a degree of public acclaim, which probably isn't based on much evidence or research. In fact, it's been so popular that Radio New Zealand says that 650 people have rung it in the first month alone. I think I've raised it as an example of how we have to work within quite a difficult sphere at the moment. And I would like to make a few remarks about what we might do to advance things. Clearly, there is quite a level of disquiet in our society about the outcomes of education, what it is like and what it should be. Let's take that opportunity to shape it. At Te Uru Amakura Springboard Trust, we have an approach that is based on the unrelenting belief in the power of strategic leadership at the school level. We are optimistic about the future. We can only make progress on the challenges we have through the leadership of our schools, and we believe in focusing strictly upon that. Our not-for-profit organisation has brought leaders together both from education and from the business and public sector to create momentum together. And we've worked with over 800 school principals. We've had 900 volunteers, and They've come to impact the lives of students, hundreds of students in every region of the country. Our principals, so we've got some in the room. I wonder if you could just wave if you've been a Springboard principal. Yes, awesome. Really great to have you here. They say it's one of the best learning they do in their careers, a point of inflection where change accelerates. We have, for those of you aware, a net promoter score of 94%. Apple Computers has a score of 70. And for every single dollar spent, there's a social return of $5.70. This is me in the back row, 1970. I'm fifth from your left. What strikes you about this photograph? It's Sanson's call in the Manawatu. The art of knitting was pretty strong in our business. And our teacher had 37 students. I counted them last night. Growing up in the country, what you can't see is a good third of them are my cousins. And I'd also like to single out Mr. Ian Knowles, our teacher, who was an extraordinary teacher and introduced me to a lifelong interest in history and social studies. Great to see Graham Aiken here. Some of my colleagues say you're still being a social studies teacher today. I grew up in the Manawatu and I was proud to have some great teachers, some great education. And it really struck me looking back at this photograph, how much we have worked to create a great New Zealand. Places, the impact of teachers and leadership should never be underestimated. And while we have such huge challenges, we can make a difference. We must step up to that. Derek asked me to comment on some 4 points, make some points about how we progress this kaupapa forward. Yeah, I think we all agree that the change is needed, and we've had a feast of ideas of what should be in that change. What we are here to do is to make that progress stick. So I've chosen just 4 key ideas. You'll be relieved to know it's not rocket science. It's how we can get the momentum on change. We need some versatile tools for clarity, not complexity. We want to see what can bring us together with a compelling reason for change. Now, when I finished my College of Education course in Canterbury in 1985, the lecturers there had, as one of the last lectures, I remember quite vividly, the challenges that faced the system in 1985. They were Māori achievement, students in rural and remote settings, low-income communities, Pasifika. All of those remain today, 40 years later. And in fact, we may actually add to those, including like neurodiversity, gender identity, student mental well-being. We have a huge hill to climb. And sometimes I wonder whether we make much progress. The ideas that I have here, curiosity, bring the outside in, simplify the goals, and evidence for progress, perhaps are about the journey, not so much the destination. But I think in this room, we must accept the moral case that we have to change, improve. If we remain the same, that will be simply detrimental. And I really liked Barb yesterday when she said, what's just holding us back? First of all, this is for you, Hannah. This little bird is in Rapiora, Robin. All right, I'm in the camp of those who are extremely optimistic about change. And within my career, whether it's been in Aero, Careers New Zealand, working with teachers such as Springboard, there is so much we need to work on to do. But one of the big things that holds us back is groupthink, where we don't quite challenge and look for new things. And so I think seek first to understand is the first rule, the curiosity. Context is an explanation, but not an excuse for an action. In a number of places, we've worked to reform and develop what could be possible. I worked at Te Papa and we were attempting to redevelop Te Papa after some 25 years of amazing success and innovation. But the weight of expectations on us as we tried to shift what was there had been very successful, held some of us back. And it was ironically that challenge, that lack of curiosity of what could be. I have Tara Fagan here who helped me enormously with the development of Hinatori, the learning lab. And just the energy and possibility was amazing. Change is always very difficult, but it's challenging, but filled with amazing opportunities. We need to look outwards and think about what might be possible. We need to examine the known and unknown and not just accept what we've inherited. My second key thought is the idea of bringing ideas from outside in. We work so hard as educators that we put so much energy into it, there's very little time for coming outside of the education's field. And this is what at Te Ura Amakura we feel very strongly about, where we put different ideas into the room. We bring volunteers from different spheres of activity in New Zealand, and we build constructive conversations across the boundaries. One of the key pieces of feedback that I hear when the volunteers talk with the school leaders is they ask them, why can't you do that? Yeah. And often the principals are a bit at a loss to explain why they can't. Working to create this diversity of viewpoint, bringing the outside in, I think is a very critical part as we work forward on a new transformed education. And recently I heard a lecture about how much we are trapped within our English language. Presentation was a person who was fluent in German and French and Dutch, and said the concepts about education in those languages are way beyond the discourse in English. And even in New Zealand, we've only just started the discussion with Māori about the way in which we can see what needs to be done. So that bringing the outside in, looking outwards, and just wonderful learner voice this morning was so imperative to what we need to do. Our algorithms that surround us in the entire world, the algorithms of the social media, they create a bubble for our intellect. We must breach that bubble. The third key point I want to make this morning is it's so important not to do everything. Martin expressed it so beautifully, didn't he, with a structure that allows us. We need to simplify the key things. When you work in the Springboard program, you're only allowed 3. Sometimes better to have less than 3. Less is more. What is important? What will be the keys to unlock greater change that can be incredibly positive? Recently, we had an amazing presentation at Springboard by our colleague Melissa Chase from Evaluation Associates, and she spoke about Hawaii Ho, the calling of what we are trying to achieve, both just out of our reach, across the horizon, just about here, but she spoke also about the proximity of control, what we can do now, where are the coalitions that we can form within our own control, and we do those things first. Let's unlock the key things that will unlock greater change. It's the point of working on the close as well as the distant. The last point you'll be relieved to hear is evidence for progress. Measure what you want to shift. Now, apparently people get quite aggro about the performance of their mobile phones. And one of our key partners that we work with is 2 Degrees. And recently, in a professional development session with some principals, they spoke about the aggro that their staff face in those 2 Degrees stores. Really quite threatful, full of danger for both the staff and the other customers. And they said, as a company, that's something they don't want to see. They want to shift the dial. So they focus measurement on how people are feeling almost on an hourly basis. The staff use their mobiles to say, are they feeling safe? And they monitor that. They have intense real-time measurement of what they want to shift. This is the critical shift that they wanted their company to focus on. And they could discuss that measurement, not to measure everything, but to measure what the key things were for change. And I thought that was an amazing metaphor for us in education. We need to measure with absolute integrity what it is we are seeking to change. Not have all the data overwhelming us, but telling people what you make of the data, what that tells us and what we might do next. And it's very important for my years working in Aero that it must be written down and discussed openly, that the progress that you make is so compelling along that journey. We at Springboard, we've invested very heavily in evaluation and evidence, and we're working hard to develop an evaluative culture. It's not just for accountability, but for progress. The performative politics can't last. The 0800 road cones is only a short-term thing because it will be deeply unsatisfying for the people who think it's a good idea. One further thing to finish on, I think, is we live in such a visual age, a design-savvy generations, that we've got to package this evidence in easily consumed pieces. And the data sharing, the data imagery is such an important aspect, not to be underestimated at all.
And lastly, in our presentations today, I just want to call Maurie Abraham up. Maurie's become a good mate, I guess, over the last few years as he and I have started to work together on a few projects, but he's also been quite instrumental in the part of the vision team that's pulled this together. But he's got some unique perspectives on the time that he spent as principal of Hobsonville Point Secondary School. So, Maurie, over to you just to share some thoughts with us.
Tēnā koutou katoa, nā mihi kia koutou, ko Maurie Abraham ahau. I ahau he tūmaki o te kura tuaro o Potiki, I ahau he tūmaki tīmata o te kura tuaro Unikiritia Hobsonville Point Secondary School. What do I do now? I basically hang out with Derek, hang on tight to his coattails and get to mix with really cool people and do a lot of learning and do some really cool work. I've always been a little bit of a disruptor ever since I was suspended from school for my hair being too long. Staging a sit-in I was disciplined for because they wouldn't let us go into our common room, and I refused to apologise to a MP who was at a political forum at our school for lying because I called him a liar in the Assembly Hall, and I refused to apologise because he was lying. And then in 1981 I helped invade Rugby Park and we managed to stop the Waikato game against the Springbok being played. When I went to a Potiki college and the day I was appointed principal, I said not one kid will be suspended from the school again. And over 10 years, not one more kid was. And then moving on to Hobsonville Point Secondary School, you know, this great opportunity to put my money where my mouth was and to try and do something that we arrogantly called transformational. Tony, I've rewritten what I was going to say 6 or 7 times over the last 12 hours. I've run out of bits, so I'll be going all over the place as I respond. But Tony Mackay He told us we need to be clear about our purpose, that we should align our values and beliefs to that purpose and align our practices to that purpose. Martin Westwell talked to us about our first choice is to be purpose-driven. And George Philhower mentioned that by simply changing practices, that doesn't bring about transformation. It's our values and beliefs that drive transformation. Maxine Graham reminded us that our values are within us and we must reflect these at all times. Tony Monfiletto emphasised that young people want learning with purpose and meaning, and I would say that teachers want that in their jobs as well. Jeff Metzler stated the tragic fact that most students are learning in an outdated model of schooling, and Bill Lucas talked about our system and schools not being fit for purpose. Barbara Alalatua, in response to a question from the floor, implored us to acknowledge that curriculum is the most powerful weapon we have, and we have to maximise that power. One of our table participants reminded us that 95% of Māori learners are in mainstream schools and generally lacking the same success as others in those schools. Yet the other 5% are in kura Māori. They're experiencing high levels of success. So this is how this country boy looks at this challenging work. And many of you will see Cynic Circles or Julia Aitken's work, and it's reminding me a lot of the pyramids that George was wanting to show us. And so thinking about the question that were posed from the floor to Barbara, the issues that she talked about in here, we're wondering how it is that we, when we know the difference between right and wrong as leaders, how is it that we are able to carry our work being driven by what's right when we're being subjected to what's going on here? So I thought, going back to the importance of being driven by purpose, I was reminded of Karina Leonard's concluding statement, and I'm sorry I've only got the English written down: nurture the child, leaders of tomorrow. So imagine that being the purpose of our schools and of our systems. And then we have to think about that purpose and say, what are the important driving values and beliefs that we could all rally around that supported us as we aim for that North Star? And maybe one of the things that we were prepared to value and believe was that learners should be at the centre. So that could be a real driving value or belief for one of our whys. And if we could agree on that as something, then we need to look at, well, what would be the guidelines to drive our action if you fit out here in the next circle? And I started to think of things like, well, we will look for ways to connect learning with our kunga's interests and passions, might be something that we could all aspire to. Or it might be, we will look for ways to align learning with each child's needs, so it become a guideline for action. And it's only then that we look at these practices, but we must do that work first before we look at the practices or the structures. It's the only way I know to navigate my way through the complexities and demands we're faced with that are reflected there on that green bit. So the question from the floor to Barbara yesterday was something like, how do we cope and respond to these things when we know what's right and wrong? And I think it's by being firm in what our purpose is and knowing what our driving values and beliefs are and what our guidelines for actions might be. And let's try to develop those in a way that they are worth rallying around, rallying behind as a collective and as a network. And that's what the work of EdRising is all about. Keep the purpose as your North Star, die in the ditch for your values and beliefs, and be guided by the principles that the collective or the community or your school or the ecosystem has agreed upon. Be one of the unstoppable practitioners out there exerting influence that Bill Lucas referred to. And Sandra's reminded to us that the real impetus from the work that she was in comes from schools. It gives us a huge amount of power. So I'm just going to really briefly talk to you about the experience at Hobsonville Point Secondary School. And I've got to be really careful. I've got a board member sitting here, right here. I've got an ex-DP sitting over here who was right from the beginning. And there's a staff member sitting over at the back who was there right from the beginning. So I'm going to do my best to tell the truth really briefly. This is the vision we walked into. And it's just a collection of words, you might say. But when you look at it, what I really love about that second half of that, learners to contribute confidently and responsibly in our changing world, it describes the graduate that we want that school to help achieve. So we need to bring it to life. Because it's saying that we want learners to be empowered to contribute confidently and responsibly in our changing world, it's not good enough for them to lead with just top academic results. So we thought really quickly about two pathways of excellence because we wanted to be driven by this purpose, this vision. And the first pathway of excellence is academic excellence. And we were really relieved to discover that there were really cool frameworks to support that. They were called the New Zealand Curriculum and the New Zealand Qualifications Framework. But when we thought about the other pathways to excellence, which we talked about as the personal excellence to personal, pathway to personal excellence, and we come up with our definition of it, we found that there weren't frameworks that existed. So we had to think about how would we create those. And with going right back here to 2012 and what I would have done for school talk or what I would have done for new metrics at that point. So we had to develop what could be a framework to support personal excellence, and we settled on these things called Hobsonville habits. And so we came up with these 10 things that are a bit like dispositions, I suppose, and we started to think about them quite incorrectly as the subject equivalent of English and maths and science for the academic side, but we soon moved away from that. But we developed these habits and we decided that these were the important dispositions that young people needed to develop so they could thrive and contribute confidently and responsibly in a changing world. And then we also had a mission like other schools. Yep, it's a collection of words, innovate, engage, and inspire. But we didn't want them just to be a collection of words, so we actually turned them into our principles so that they would drive our actions. So we had to delve deeply into what did it mean to inspire, to innovate. And in a secondary school setting in New Zealand, that meant did our best to personalise learning, because in most cases it was a one-size-fits-all roller coaster ride. What about engagement? What did that mean? Well, our principle that supported that was through powerful partnerships, because we knew that our 21st century learners needed their learning to be authentic, and the way to do that was to partner it to their real world and to people outside in the community. So we looked for ways to do that. And then the inspiration came through deep challenge and inquiry. In my 40 years involved in secondary education, I haven't met one kid who's been inspired by chasing credits, but every single kid I've met is inspired when they can delve deeply into problems and issues and ask questions that are important to them. So those were the things that drove our school. And when we decided at the end of year 10 kids, what were we going to do about NCA level 1, we were so tired, we innovated out, we almost said, let's do what everyone else is doing. But we came to this inspire through deep challenge inquiry and said, if we're going to put 15-year-olds through chasing 120 credits a year and move to shallow learning, then we're telling a lie to our principles. So we had to carry on the transformation. And we came up with our set of values: excellence, inquiry, connectors, collaboration, innovation. But we didn't want them just to sit there. So we decided that when our students were involved in project learning, that the only way that they would be assessed would be against those values. So they'd complete a project and they would be assessed against how strong was their inquiry, how connected were they, how much collaboration did they show, how innovative was their process and their outcome, and how excellent was the result. I made lots of reference to lots of the other speakers that supported this as being a good idea way back then, which I was going to suggest that we'd done it that way on purpose, but it's actually by happenstance. One example, and it references to what Derek mentioned before, was how do we actually bring those to life? If we think those things are important, those habits and those values are important, how do we bring them to life? And I think about our prize givings at our school, because I'd gone to decades of prize givings in schools that have a vision or a value that says we want well-rounded people with strong dispositions and great academics, and hundreds of people that sit in the hall and watch the kids go across the stage, first in English, first in maths, first in science. And almost every single kid watching was proud of those people, but almost every kid knew that I can never be first in maths. I can never be first in English. It's a function like that which shows what's really true to a school. Those public events are really telling schools, the community, what's true to them. So our prize giving only had prizes for who was the strongest kid for being adventurous, who was the strongest kids for being creative through the Hobsonville habits. And as they came across the stage, the story of how they showed their compassion was read out. The community sat there and knew that's what we thought was the most important. And then our top prizes were our values, because values means most valuable, the most important. So the kids would be going across getting their prizes for just establishing the greatest habit of inquiry, or how connected were they, how collaborative were they, how innovative were they. And when we come to excellence, we got a bit traditional and said, right, let's have an academic excellence prize. Other schools call it a DUX. But if we wanted to give true equity to both sides of that tug of war that someone showed us before, we had to have the prize for personal excellence. Who showed the greatest capacities and capabilities around all of those habits and all of those values? And then we had an overall prize above all of that. Who had the greatest academic excellence and personal excellence? So our community would see that that was what was important to us. Now, a word from the sponsor. If you're interested in that work and how to bring it to life, Derek and I do some really cool stuff. The 3Rs program, and there's some of our 60 graduates from New Zealand and Australia here in the room, none of them from Australia, but we've got some leaflets out there. If you think anybody in your team would benefit by doing some work which would help them to lead and be driven by what's really important to them, what's really their why and what their purpose is. Thank you very much.